And welcome, Hoosier Nation, to our 156th episode of the Hoosier Sound, where we are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. We're recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on Tuesday evening, August 25th, 2020, where I am your host, Noah Freeman. On the docket for tonight, we told you we would come back to this subject, and we are. Bruiser Flint, of course, left the program a couple weeks ago to go move on to Kentucky. So we're going to talk about our thoughts and reactions to Bruiser Flint leaving one of the second to last Archie Miller, his first hire, at least, of the program. We're going to talk about that. And then our second portion of the podcast is going to talk about his replacement. Now that we know of the person Archie Miller and his staff is hiring, Kenya Hunter. So before we get to that, here with me tonight, it's the trio here yet again. Nithin, Matt, how are you guys doing? Nithin, I'll give it over to you first, since you are in Bloomington itself. So you can give us I know you just mentioned you've been gone a little bit, but give us your quick Bloomington update, because I'm sure everyone's a little curious to see how Bloomington has started this school year with all the circumstances.
I know. And I know there were some videos that went viral last week of some parties going on here in the city limits and the town limits of Bloomington. So everyone's a little bit on edge. Everyone's sort of got their guards up and their shields up and their masks up and on and everything. So you can at this point just hope that the students are taking their precautions. Just as a personal testimony, I was walking around outside a little bit earlier today, and it did seem like the majority, if not almost the unanimous, portion of students were wearing masks and social distancing outside. I haven't been inside a building yet, but at this point, you hope everything goes smoothly. There are going to be some bumps just naturally, but it's going to be a roller. It's going to be a roller coaster ride as far as how classes are conducted during the age of COVID-19. But from a sports standpoint, man, it was jam packed over the weekend. There's playoff basketball, playoff hockey, the Kenya Hunter news. So it should be a really fun episode tonight.
Yeah, things at least are looking a little better than where Iowa is sitting, but. Matt, I know you've started a new job within the past few weeks. How is everything going on your end?
Yep, it's going great. Started teaching some students over in China, here in the United States, virtually, of course. I'm not teleporting or anything, but through my computer. So that's been a lot of fun. But yeah, I'm really excited to get into this Kenya Hunter news and talk about some positive news for IU basketball. So that's really what I'm looking forward to.
And our last bit of news, it's quite important news before we get started with the recent staffing changes on IU's team. This is sadly going to be my last week on the podcast as being a regular podcaster on the Hoosier Sound. Matt and I started this just under 3 years ago, so we've been doing really good with this, and the podcast isn't being over completely whatsoever. I'm just having to take a step or two back because I'm personally starting my master's degree locally, as well as teaching full-time, so doing going to school basically part-time and teaching full-time with everything going on. Especially I got to drop a few things, and sadly this is not the only thing I've had to drop, so this is something I'm not going to be gone permanently. I'll still be able to sub here and there and stuff like that whenever the guys need help, but I won't be able to. I do a lot of behind the scenes work too as well, so sadly I won't be here on a weekly basis, but don't let that deter you from listening on a weekly basis. I know sometimes it's strange when there's a change in, like when Nithin came here. I bet all the fans, whether it's a good or bad thing at first, it's different when you have your weekly shows. I know, like when radio shows have changes, it's all different and stuff. But thank you guys so much for the opportunity to do all of this, and we wouldn't have shows like this without people like you listening to this. So I thank you, and I won't be gone. Period. But I'll have to take a small step back.
Yeah, no, I mean, Noah, look, man, you were the founder here along with Matt. So I'm sure our fans at Indiana HQ and the Hoosier Sound will hear from you again. There's no question about that. So
Oh,
So,
sure. And
yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if after I'm able to finish a lot of this, in like half a year, I'm able to get back on here on a regular basis or something too. So for now, we can say it's,
you better.
We can say
I would be lonely without you.
We'll just keep,
I don't know how I'm going to do this podcast without you being
That's true.
I don't know what it's like.
We'll just have to keep using the word postpone. I'll postpone my, my weekly appearances. We'll say that. We'll use that, the P word. All right, let's get into some IU specific business, though. Bruiser Flint leaving. I first want to give you a little bit of background about the domino effect on how he left, because that I feel like is really important. If you look at it bare bones, Bruiser Flint going to Kentucky, it's hard not to have a sour taste in your mouth, even just a little bit. But when you dig into it a little deeper and you see all of the channels of how it ebbed and how it flowed and the history between Bruiser Flint and his now new program, it all actually makes a lot of sense, and you start to feel really happy for him if you didn't already. So the domino effect was the New York Knicks. The basketball New York Knicks have, if you follow anything of NBA, of course you know that the New York Knicks have had, we'll just say, to say the least, a little bit of trouble in having a successful basketball program. Not even the past few years, but the past 2 decades, more or less. So their next coach in the ringer is Tom Thibodeau. So when Tom got on, obviously you got to find a staff, and his first one of his first picks for his first set of staff was former Kentucky assistant Kenny Payne. So that's where the Kentucky position opened up, and opened up a little late with all the COVID things and finding a coach, because it took the Knicks a long time to find a coach because they can't get it right as of recently. So then obviously that position opened up. So Bruiser Flint was asked to become the replacement for Kenny Payne. Now, this is not necessarily, it's not a he leaving Indiana for Kentucky, leaving the going over to the dark side. He has a lot of experience with John Calipari himself, which is where this actually makes a lot of sense. So Calipari, before he did a bunch of stints in the NBA, before finding his place at Kentucky itself, was the head coach at UMass, and that was where he basically started to make a name for himself, and that's where Bruiser Flint was an assistant for him for 7 years. Flint actually was the assistant coach with him before taking over when Calipari moved on to the former New Jersey Nets, and that's where it makes sense because he worked with Calipari before, and that's where he's like, hey, I know you. This is where I think it would be good, especially this late into the game where you won't be able to do as much of a national search as possible. So that's kind of a little bit of background. So Nathan, what were your thoughts at least? Did you kind of have my initial reaction where at first you're like, ugh, kind of scoffed at it a little bit, but then as you remembered kind of the history behind it, you're like, oh, that makes sense, and I'm glad he's able to kind of move up the chain, if you will, in terms of his career path.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm not sure if it's moving up the chain, to be honest with you. But as you're going to see with Kenya Hunter and Archie Miller, when you have a connection with someone, you're going to try to tap into it when you can, and that's basically what Bruiser Flint was able to do here. Knowing John Calipari for as long as he has, that's a natural sort of next step for Bruiser Flint. Now, the question I have with him is what's he trying to do here? Is he trying to be a longtime assistant at Kentucky? Because I really don't see Calipari leaving unless there's some sort of shocking development in the NBA or elsewhere in college basketball. But I don't see Calipari taking another college job. So I'm not sure what Bruiser's trying to do when it comes to his choice, but at the end of the day, it makes sense. If you know John Calipari and there's a spot on John Calipari's staff on his bench, it makes complete sense to take it. From an IU standpoint, Indiana's going to lose a really good recruiter, somebody who's been described as having an engaging personality. But overall, look, Indiana's ceiling with Bruiser Flint over 3 seasons was a 20-win team that would have made the NCAA tournament last year if it weren't for a pandemic. So him leaving, not the end of the world, but it makes plenty of sense.
I agree with that completely. And honestly, hats off to Bruiser for coming in and helping rebuild the program. Honestly, walking around school, walking around campus and actually interacting with him, he was actually one of the more enjoyable assistant coaches to talk with. they actually were all enjoyable. But he was one of the more vocal ones who would, remember your name and if he knew you and walk around and say hi. So thank you, Bruiser, for all you did. And no, I've got to stress this. He did not go to the dark side. He went to go and work with his friend and close friend and colleague and John Calipari. And when you get that opportunity, you take it. I'm also sure he maybe got a little bit of a pay raise. So I'm assuming he probably did. So, I mean, good for him and good for his family, and congratulations to them. And we're now going to move on to the new coach, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that stood out to me just over the last few days is Bruiser Flint liked coaching at Indiana. If you saw the message he sent out on Twitter, if you saw the reaction of IU players to Flint's social media message, his note, it was overwhelmingly positive and grateful for Bruiser Flint's time here at IU. And it's not surprising. It's a guy with 30 years of coaching experience, head coach experience, assistant coach experience at the highest level in college basketball. Flint, again, not the end of the world, but it was definitely sort of both heartwarming and interesting to see guys like Trace Jackson Davis say, man, yeah, we're going to miss you, coach. Your presence was felt here.
Yep, exactly. I agree with all the stuff you guys have been saying. And except for the one comment, Nathan, you said you didn't know if this is necessarily a step up for him. And I'd almost argue against that, because I think at least since Calipari got into Kentucky, I don't think even IU fans would really argue that Kentucky has been a rung above Indiana the past just over a decade since Calipari got there, and this is kind of Flint's path. So, but I do agree with you, Nathan, for questioning exactly what he wants to do, since he's starting to get up there in terms of his age, and his coaching career is getting closer to the end than it is the beginning. He's was on the staff at Copen State before becoming the assistant coach at UMass for 7 years, like we said earlier, with Calipari, and then he took over for him for the next 5 years as the head coach at UMass, and then he went over to where he had most of his tenure at Drexel. He was there for about 15 years as the head coach at Drexel, and that's kind of where he was able to make at least somewhat of a name for him to jump up into those higher tier D1 schools, and that's where Archie took him over, was from Drexel, which then obviously he's been at IU for the past 3 years and then going to Kentucky. But I think I remember looking it up. I can fact check as I'm talking here. Nathan, you're right. I think he's 55. That's what I wanted to check. And so really, first of all, with Bruiser Flint going over to with Calipari is 61. Yeah, he's 55. Calipari is 61. So really, you would think Calipari is probably going to finish his coaching, his career, all of it with Kentucky, I would assume, unless some humongous NBA opportunity comes up. But on the flip side, he's tried that, and it didn't necessarily work. He tried it a couple times with a couple different teams, and it really didn't work. He was one of those examples where you see those really good college coaches, those elite college coaches that try and take a step up in the NBA, and you would think it would equate and be really similar and have a lot of success. But he was one of those stories that typically now you're seeing a lot of college coaches not take that leap up to the NBA because of stories like Calipari himself.
And they also aren't Brad Stevens.
Exactly. So. Yeah. Like at least the majority. Yeah. You are correct.
Yeah. For what it's worth with Bruiser though, I took a look at Kentucky's coaching staff right now, and one of the guys they have still as an assistant, even after all these moves over the course of the last couple of weeks, is Tony Barbee, a guy who was a head coach at Auburn in the SEC, who already has sort of an elevated assistant title, sort of like the next man up to John Calipari. So just to me, that's where I was coming from. Like, okay, it's not like he's the associate head coach at Kentucky now, Bruiser Flint, something like that, If he, again, no question, Kentucky is a better college basketball program than Indiana is. Like, there's no debating that. But just as far as what Flint's influence might be, just thinking about it off the top of my head, I think he would have more at Indiana than in Lexington. But hey, you know what? Maybe if we fast forward 5 years from now, this type of comment will look absolutely silly and stupid, and Bruiser Flint's on his way to a prominent head coaching job. I
mean, yeah, no, I agree with what you said. Just because he and Calipari are so close in age, it's not like it's not like he's being groomed to take over for him even in 10 or 15 years. Because a lot of those programs now are looking at trying to groom an assistant coach for that long to try and take over.
And he's done that before.
Exactly.
He's been groomed to take over for Calipari. Exactly. That didn't work out well. So
quite literally. So yeah, I agree with you in that sense. It's just, but I probably think, and again, not knowing his personal side, which is where this is just us and speculating, and this is totally up to him. I have to go to Matt's comment where, hey, he gets to work with a friend, so he might just want to live his last, I don't know how long he wants to teach, whether it's 10, 15, maybe even closer to 20 years or something. Maybe he just wants to just live out that time with a friend, or at least a closer friend, because of course, I mean, it's not like he didn't like Archie Miller, but I mean, you've hit 3 years with him versus 7 years at UMass. There's probably a closer relationship, and he's probably stayed in touch at least enough to be able to get hired on his staff again.
I'm pretty sure Coach Calipari was the one that recommended Bruiser to Archie Miller.
I don't doubt
when Archie was talking, because again, Archie and Coach Cal are both close because the Millers have worked with the Caliparis all over the place. And just the coaching tree in general just overlaps so much that they all just know each other. But I'm pretty sure Bruiser was recommended by Calipari, and so it makes a lot of sense that he's going back there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a big thing with assistant coaches and even head coaches in college basketball, right? It's like, who do you know? Who what's your coaching tree like, right? We saw it a little bit with IU in the past with Tom Crean and Tim Buckley and Steve McLean. Hey, you know someone who knows someone, and eventually those guys move on and get assistant or head coaching jobs. So yeah, I mean, the only other question I had, sort of maybe transitioning a little bit, is what are both of you expecting with Tom Ostrom and Mike Roberts? All of a sudden, Bruiser Flint is out of the picture at IU. Okay, we're going to talk about Kenya Hunter here in a moment, but Tom Ostrom's the associate head coach here at Indiana. Mike Roberts came over before last season from a high-level mid-major school. What sort of added responsibility do you think both of them will have? Matt, maybe I'll start with you on this.
Yeah, sure. I mean, they're obviously going to have a little bit more added responsibility with one less voice in the room, right? I would assume, since they're both the returning members of the staff, that they will take over some of the responsibilities that Bruiser had. That means some of the recruiting that Bruiser was in charge of, they'll be taking over those targets. I'm also sure that they will be taking over in maybe meetings some of the analyzing that Bruiser was doing. So whether that's looking at defensive schemes of the other teams, or whatever it is that they're doing in the team meetings, I am sure that both of them will have a larger workload. But I think just in general, I remember Bruiser being the one to check Archie a couple times on the bench. Most notably, they had a yelling match at each other. So I am sure one of those two guys, whether Ostrom or Mike Roberts, one of the two coaches, will be taking over responsibility of checking Archie during games, and hopefully having a counter voice into what Archie believes to get a team consensus there on the bench.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of it actually has to do with Mike Roberts, because I think Tom Ostrom and Archie Miller have at least found some sort of chemistry for what they want in particular. I mean, obviously, minor bits and pieces and things will change here, but I mean, even Matt, to what you were mentioning with Bruiser Flint kind of checking Archie Miller, I think Mike Roberts, when you just look at him and know the personality of him, I think he's going to be that guy to fit into that. I think he's going to have to take a bigger step up, and of course, naturally, you would anyway in your second year at a program, because it's not your first year. You already got your feet wet, yada yada yada. But even not to like dodge your question, Nathan, in a way, I think Kenya Hunter brings a lot more than maybe people are going to realize. I think this was a pretty sneaky hire in terms of some of the stuff that his strong suits are. So I think they're going to be able to complement this new hire and use those strengths. And we're going to talk about that specifically here in a little bit. I don't want to dive into that right now, but then be able to do like Matt said, and what I was trying to say a little bit is adding kind of Mike Roberts as taking just a tiny bit more of an elevated role. And then who knows? It's probably usually always is anyway in terms of things like recruiting, is just who takes over those recruiting connections and stuff like that. But right before we talk about Kenya Hunter, Nithin, give us the good news and the scoop on who won the week this last week in IU sports.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's not been too much going on. A number of swimmers were selected to the preliminary USA 2020-21 national swim team, which is exciting. A lot of the familiar faces you've seen and heard before, like Lily King, were nominated to that squad. In the NBA, you had a number of IU guys. Maybe while the points per game and the rebounds and the assists are gradually dropping a little bit, and the playing time's dropping a little bit, and you're seeing a bunch of guys on winning playoff teams, with the exception of Victor Oladipo, which I know Matt was excited about to see his Heat knock off the Pacers. You've got Romeo Langford in Boston knocking off the Sixers. It looks like Jawan Morgan with Utah is going to advance to the next round over Denver, although that series isn't over yet. OG Anunoby in Toronto is going to move on. Eric Gordon's Rockets are up in their series. So a number of a pretty exciting series, early playoff runs here for Hoosiers in the NBA, and who knows? Last year OG won his title and got his ring. We'll see which NBA players that formerly played here in Bloomington, which guys can end up winning it all.
Yeah, for sure. And Romeo, even though it was probably a minor part, at least contributed to now there's a lot of drama in Philadelphia with the very recent firing of their head coach. So, Matt, you missed your opportunity again. The Heat sweep the Pacers, and you don't talk anything about it whatsoever. I think he's probably trying to be nice to.
I'm not going to rub it in. I mean, it was a sweep. Oladipo didn't play his greatest basketball, and I can't wait to see him in a Heat jersey next year.
All right. Let's get on to Kenya Hunter, and I'm going to kind of give a little bit of background of him as well, because Nithin talked about that coaching tree, and before I could even jump in, it really matters. That coaching tree really helps you change from job to job. So Kenya Hunter is actually a native of Arlington, Virginia, really, really close to me. Went to Wakefield High School, which I know of. We played them all the time in football and that kind of stuff. But he did his undergrad at Duquesne and did his graduate degree at NC State. Then he moved on to, he kind of did a lot of work with his alma maters. He was the on staff at Duquesne for a couple of years before moving to NC State as the director of basketball operations. And here is the key. He was on staff he was the director of basketball operations at NC State from 2000 to 2004. And when per se was Archie Miller at NC State as a student and a point guard? 1998 to 2002. So his last 2 years of his college career and his basketball, at least playing wise at NC State, he was with Kenya Hunter himself, at least in the same program. So ding, ding, ding. That's the major news of where this big connection comes from. After that, though, he moved on to Xavier. He was there for 3 years before. This is kind of where he got his big, at least really helped elevate his coaching career, was when he worked at Georgetown. He was there for 6 years, and he worked with those. If you think 2007 to 2013, you think, wait a second, that was actually when Georgetown was really doing really well and had a lot of really key future NBA stars like Roy Hibbert, Greg Monroe, former number 3rd overall pick Otto Porter Jr., and he was a very big role in developing those guys at Georgetown to go on to the NBA. So that's kind of where he's hanging his hat on a lot. And then he was at Nebraska on staff for 5 years, so he's had some Big Ten experience already before becoming the assistant coach at UConn for the past couple of years. And then, of course, now is with Archie Miller at Indiana. So, original thoughts. Your again. So this is obviously a couple days old, Nathan. What were your at least original takes? Did you know much about Kenya before? Did you have to do a lot of research? Do you like the hire? Does it make sense? What were your kind of just initial thoughts overall with Archie Miller's latest take on hiring someone for his staff.
Yeah, I guess first and foremost, what's interesting is Indiana technically has not made this official yet. There are basically reports out there from guys like John Rothstein and Adam Zagoria that say, hey, Indiana's chosen Kenya Hunter, but for whatever reason, IU has not put their foot down and put pen to paper as far as actually confirming this news.
For UConn, right now it says technically that he is on leave. Right now, his official status at UConn is he is on leave. He's not actually officially gone yet.
That's really funny. I mean, I guess in some way it feels like we're all on leave here in 2020. But with Kenya Hunter, I'm going to just cut straight to the chase. I don't just like this hire. I love it. I mean, look, at the end of the day, I'm not sure how much an assistant coach hire really moves the needle. But as far as being able to check all the boxes for IU, Kenya Hunter does all of it. Tim Miles, who used to coach at Nebraska and somebody is going to get another head coaching job at the Division I level. Tim Miles said, yeah, man, this guy's an excellent recruiter. And you know what? When I take a step back and I analyze, okay, what do I want an assistant coach to do? I'm really looking at two things. I'm looking at recruiting and I'm looking at, hey, how is he in the in-game coaching? How is he as far as preparing a team to play? How's he as far as game planning for an opponent? And Kenya Hunter has received rave reviews at every stop along the way, whether it's from John Thompson III at Georgetown or Tim Miles at Nebraska or Dan Hurley at UConn. Hunter has gotten a lot of credit. And frankly, I'm going to make a not so bold prediction that, pandemic or not, within about 3 years, Kenya Hunter is going to be a head coach somewhere in college basketball. I mean, it's honestly at this point overdue for him. If you just look at his resume and the type of NBA prospects that he's developed, Noah, like you mentioned, I love Kenya Hunter on this IU staff. I think he's going to make a big difference. I have a good feeling he's going to work together with Tom Ostrom, Mike Roberts, to really give Archie all the support he needs. So, crossing our fingers, hoping there's a basketball season. I do think Kenya Hunter is going to be a very, very effective coach at Indiana for however long he's here.
I agree totally with him. In fact, I might have had even the same thoughts as him. However, I think I didn't know who he was at first. I'm not going to lie. I heard the hire and went, who? Sorry, what? There's a guy named Kenya? I mean, it's an awesome first name, but what? So I went and researched him again, everything across the board. You can't find like one thing bad about the guy anywhere. Any stop he's been, it's all been, he's great. He's a great player developer. He's a really good recruiter. Like, that's all I needed to hear, honestly, were those two things. He's good at developing players. Obviously, he has a track record of doing, you can go, hey, there's literally three NBA guys or former NBA guys that I've developed. Here they are. That's a really good list. Again, developing some of the kids that came through and athletes came through UConn recently as well. That's something else. And then also, recruiting is always great. I always take more recruiting, especially at a place like IU, where you can go after some of the better recruits and build a more talented team than you can at maybe a place like UConn. So I'm super excited to see what he can do with the staff. I think he fits in perfectly. I think the connection between him and Archie is really cool, especially developing Archie his last 2 years and then working for him. That means Archie and him are obviously already very well acquainted with each other and are going to work pretty well with each other starting off the bat.
Yeah, and I thought it was funny, just like you kind of mentioned there, Matt, in this day and age of social media and message boards and how hyped IU fans can get at times, there was no hint or indication that this is the route Indiana was going to go as far as the assistant coaching job. There wasn't even a sniff of a rumor until the news came down on Sunday. Now, I'm going to throw something out there just to ruffle some feathers. Kenya Hunter was pretty integral in the recruitment of 4-star 2020 forward Javonte Brown-Ferguson to UConn. And with 2 scholarship spots open on IU's roster this year, I wonder if there's a little magic Kenya Hunter can pull off. I'm just throwing it out there with no basis or support whatsoever, but there's nothing wrong with the little, mixing it up a little. I think that would be quite an interesting development if it actually went down. Not to distract from the fact that overall I do like Kenya Hunter on IU staff.
Obviously, though, it's as Nathan was alluding to a little bit of sarcasm. If you couldn't tell, that it's obviously a little harder for a player to want to opt out of a program when it wasn't the head coach per se. So, but yeah, I had the exact same reaction that Matt said he did, where I was like, Kenya Hunter, who is he? And all I saw was UConn, and I'm like, okay, UConn's obviously not to where it was even 8 or 9 years ago, but still a good and a decent program. And but then when you actually go to research him, he doesn't even have like a Wikipedia page just to check up really easily his last coaching stints, and just have some things, whether some of it is obviously true or not, with in true Wikipedia fashion, but he doesn't even have a page for him yet, which is kind of like, who is this guy? So you have to go in. I had to go into like the UConn staff thing itself, where they usually, every university has a little bio from each person, and that's usually where we got all of our information from, just because, yeah, he's not very well known. And I think you both articulated a lot of the strengths that he has coming into this staff, and Matt really articulated the two strengths, and really just all we needed to hear, and was really recruiting. But more importantly, at least as of recently, the couple things that people were bashing Tom Crean for, at least consistently, and then at least bashing Archie Miller for, besides the offense and the shooting part, was player development. Hey, I mean, you had Romeo Langford go to the NBA, but he was like a really big recruit that was going to go to the NBA regardless of what he did. He could have stunk the 1 year that he was at IU, but he was still going to go and get drafted anyway. So really, what has he been doing? And this is the kind of hire that at least helps him show that he's going to be able to help develop more NBA players. And again, I'm not even saying that there's no NBA talent on the current roster, but just from at least the critics that people have been talking about, that is kind of at least checking one of the boxes to, hey, I'm going to take a step forward and try and move some of these players along. And before, Nathan, you begin to your point, you think of like Roy Hibbert, successful, but then kind of Greg Monroe, successful, but then kind of Otto Porter Jr., same kind of thing. Number 3 pick, and then was basically, where is he now? You almost don't even know what team he's on right now. And in his defense, for helping Georgetown, and by the way, also, those are incredible references. When I think it was Nathan was referenced, those are very good references to have in your corner for you. But I mean, he got those guys to the NBA, and really after like 3 or 4 years in the NBA, you can't really fault their development in the NBA for what the college assistant coach was doing in particular. So.
Yeah. How dare you sully the name of Otto Porter Jr.? He's on the Chicago Bulls.
He was on the Wizards for forever. I can do whatever I want with him.
Chicago has a basketball
team? Oh man. Hey, Arturas
you mean Chicago still has a basketball team?
You
should be saying.
Your 4th overall pick in the upcoming NBA draft. The lottery ping pong balls are nice to the Bulls for once, but what I was
to the Wizards.
what I was going to mention here real quick is that from a recruiting standpoint, it seems like all these previous head coaches, from a recruiting standpoint, it seems like all the previous head coaches that Kenya Hunter worked for have just been totally glowing about his recruiting ability. And even if you look at the numbers, UConn's got a top 40 recruiting class nationally coming into the season, regardless of the entire poaching subject that I approached earlier. Even Nebraska, when Kenya Hunter was there, they had a number of highly regarded recruits come through that program. And I think IU fans could tell you that Nebraska's been quite thorny in the Big Ten, at least up until last season. But the one thing that kind of caught my attention is that Hunter received a lot of praise for his in-game coaching too, and his game planning. There was a game a few years ago before Hunter went to UConn, when Hunter was an assistant at Nebraska, where the Cornhuskers beat Michigan 72-52. And it was, as you could tell, it was a blowout. But that was a Michigan team that ended up making the national championship game that year before losing to Villanova, I believe. So, just as recently as 4 or 5 years ago, Kenya Hunter, who was credited with the game plan that evening when Nebraska beat Michigan by 2 miles, said, "Yeah, this was all Kenya Hunter's game plan." If he could pull off 1 or 2 of those this upcoming season, with as good as the Big Ten's going to be, that could be the difference at the end of the day between the 4 seed and the 5 seed in the Big Ten tournament or in the NCAA tournament, and we know how big of a difference that can make.
Oh yeah, and
how dare you talk about the Big Ten tournament? We don't talk about that terrible, terrible time here.
I'm going to pause for a second on I wanted to go a little bit more into, we talked about, hey, he's most likely going to be good with recruiting and development and just kind of broader topics. I want to kind of get into the potential he could have with the staff and maybe like Nathan was talking about on the bench during game days. But before we get to that, Matt, give us our social media shout out for the week.
Yeah, so social media shout out the week again. During COVID, not a lot happening on social media other than the Kenya Hunter topic, but we just covered that, so I had to find something else. We're going to go with New Jersey numbers. I know, we're really digging into the bag here, but
it's important.
I know. Hey, that's right. We got to know who's playing and where and who's who. My mom kept like mixing up. Who was it? It was Romeo and Jake Forrester because of both their hair. They had the blonde tipped hair. We'd be watching games. She'd be like, "Why is it Romeo in?" I'm like, "Mom, Romeo's number 0." And she's like, "Oh, I don't ever look at the numbers. Just look at their hair." And I'm like, "Okay." So please look at the numbers. So we got new numbers for most of the basketball team, including the freshmen's numbers coming in. I think Anthony Leal's number 3. Trey Galloway's 4. Mm-hmm. Or no. Christian Lander's 4. But yeah, they're going through it right now. Sebastian Scott, who's a new walk-on, is 15. George Ramos 22. Galloway's 32. Armand Franklin 2. Michael Shipp 5. Nathan Children's 14. Jerome Hunter 21. Trey Jackson Davis is 23. I think that's a new number for him. Mm-hmm. Rob Finney is 10. Grace Thompson's 25. And then Cooper Bybee 0. Algebra Durham 1. And then Joey Brunk has the same number as last year. So overall, I think the only difference in numbers is that Christian Lander took number 4 from Trace Jackson Davis, and Trace Jackson Davis went and took the all-important number 23. So
the number 23 that won't, I guess, be retired for Demezy Anderson's contributions to Indiana.
Oh, yeah. Yes, that's right. Good old Demezy. Anyways, so that was on the Indiana men's basketball Twitter. If you have to go find that, and you don't know where it is on Twitter, I don't know what rock you're living under, but it's Indiana MBB on Twitter. And then go follow us at Indiana HQ on Twitter. Again, our Twitter is still down because Twitter obviously hates us and thinks we're some sort of bot account. So thanks, Twitter.
That number 4 at Indiana is a pretty big number, and Christian Lander is taking it on day one just recently, right? With Victor Oladipo and Robert Johnson, who I feel like it's frequently overlooked for his contributions in Bloomington. And of course, last year it was TJD who rocked it. So, hey, look, it started with, I guess not started with, but Oregon football really started sort of picking up the uniform thing as a big deal for recruiting and stuff. So, we kind of laughed at it a minute ago, but it's crazy. I mean, sometimes, alternate jerseys and different jersey numbers seem to take social media by storm, if nothing else.
Which makes it perfect for Matt's social media shout out of the week. Now, as we start to wrap up this episode and talking about current basketball news, which is so nice to say at the end of August when a schedule hasn't even come out yet, which typically schedules out, we can have a scheduled podcast. Current basketball talk is just it's a nice phrase that we really underestimate. Matt, Nathan was talking a little bit about more maybe some game day stuff, and of course this is just I would venture to say that all 3 of us don't know very much about Kenya Hunter, and I would venture to say that most Indiana people don't know very much about Kenya Hunter, at least detailed X's and O's and things like that, because again, most people didn't know who he was before. So really we're kind of referencing off of, like Nathan said, the kind of coaches that he had before and some of his strengths and stuff. But Matt, is there anything in particular that stands out to you that he's bringing to the table besides some of the recruitment and player development aspects that we have previously talked about?
I mean, again, player development is huge, and I don't really have anything outside of that. Again, there's not a ton of information on Kenya out there at our disposal. Again, that's going to be something that Archie's going to have to talk about in a press conference about when he gets hired, but when that happens, we don't know. Yeah. But I would like to put out there on the table that I know Bruiser Flint was out there on the floor running warm-ups before the game, pre-game. That's something I can see Kenya having a hand in, especially working in player development previously. This is something that he'll obviously try to put his stamp on in the program that I think he'll come in. So that's something to look for when you're in the stands, when we get to go back into Assembly Hall eventually and watch our Hoosiers.
That's right. Hey, maybe that's something IU's official Twitter account should do once the season starts, assuming it probably starts without fans, live stream those warm-ups so you can get a good look at what Kenya Hunter is doing out there. But as far as Hunter's concerned, the one thing that stands out to me is that from a specialty standpoint, he seems to get more out of front court players, bigs, than he does compared to guards. So when you talk about guys like Trace Jackson Davis going into a big year for his professional development and his just development in general, guys like Race Thompson, Joey Brunk, you could probably extend it to Trey Galloway and Jerome Hunter too. Those are 5 guys that are each going to have a pretty big impact on IU basketball fairly quickly, from TJD all the way to the freshman Galloway. Each of those 5 guys are going to play a pretty big role on this basketball team. So Kenya Hunter is going to have a lot of work to do from the first day he sets foot in Bloomington. It's going to be a fun ride. We're already pretty excited to see what Indiana basketball is going to do in this upcoming season, ranking right now in the sort of the 20 to 25 range in the country. Big Ten's going to be loaded. The NCAA tournament's always a wild ride, so very excited to see what impact Kenya Hunter can make here.
For sure, and I'm going to linger on one point before bringing up a different topic. Nathan, you talked about that game plan that he had, and then also maybe more of his strengths being in the front court. It seems like he's also he's got a bunch of tricks up his sleeve that he'll be able to kind of help because of course, like you said earlier, even Nathan, where how much does an assistant coach hire really move the needle? And the answer is pretty much always not very much. But if he can able to have a game like that with, you articulated it very well, could be like the difference between a 7th or the 8th seed versus 4 or 5 or something like that. When the Big Ten has been very competitive recently, that's something where a game plan like that, where you just need a one and done, he's got something, he has a scout, he even knows just a little bit of Nebraska's recent tendencies because he was there semi-recent, just whatever it is, be able to come in with that. But moving into that, and particularly with this year specifically in the short term compared to the long term with what we've been focusing on, is again, it's August 25th. When do you typically ever hear about hires happening at the end of August, unless something really bad happened with another program and then things have to move? So they've already had, even in a normal year, they've already had their summer sessions. They've had where you really get to know the team. It's more of a relaxed setting because it's not official practices and things. You kind of get to get acclimated with the program. You get to take more time because you can't be on the court as much in the summer as you can, obviously, when practices have started. So the coaches can be together more and you can really get a feel for them. How is, again, the late hiring, let alone COVID-19, how is that going to affect his short term in what he's going to do this year? And I think the answer is you're not going to see a lot of him very much because, again, the earliest, again, he's not like you said, Nathan, he's not even hired right now, so he can't even get into really start even meeting with the coaches over Zoom or something like that officially, because that would be breaching all the rules and stuff. And and then even little parts as to me being a teacher and then coming in as a teacher as well. Even little things, I've thought of this when we go back to in-person teaching. We're starting virtually, by the way, we're not like a lot of Indiana they're able to start in person, but I was thinking of this as a teacher, like wearing a mask the whole time. Facial expressions are such a huge key in developing relationships with students, or in this case, athletes, and really having that. I'm going to try and do it to where my sound doesn't get muffled up too much. You can't tell my expression. Even if I'm smiling, you can't tell for those watching on live on YouTube, you can't tell what the expression is. So you could see, like, this could be a really genuine guy that's trying to get to know some of these players, but I guarantee these coaches are going to have the masks on the whole time, and that's just going to kind of slow down, is what my whole point was, slow down the progression of him kind of getting integrated into the program. Yada, 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 let alone all the other things of not being able to be in with the team as much anyway in person because of things going on, and just long story short, I would expect this year, whatever basketball is able to be happen, that we don't see too much of him, at least at the forefront of a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a good point you made initially by saying, in late August, do you ever get a quality addition to your coaching staff or even to your basketball roster if push comes to shove? And the answer almost always is no. But it does say a bit about still the national sort of star power of the Indiana basketball program, which I think is kind of up for a perennial, never-ending debate. Exactly how nationally relevant is IU basketball? Well, hey, look, on August 20 whatever, they were able to get a high-quality assistant coach from UConn, a program that's won 2 national titles in the last 10 to 15 years or so. So, that still means quite a bit. It means that Indiana still has quite a bit of pull, and it's exciting to see Kenya Hunter, who has a pretty long resume as it is, come over to Bloomington, and it should be a fun ride. I think IU fans are going to like him.
Yeah, I agree. And if anything, and this is nothing against Bruiser Flint, just if anything, if people are, I know, just being frustrated with the program, not officially making the tournament and all that kind of stuff, if anything, it's just a change of scene. And sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad, but like if anything, it's just, hey, there's a new face, there's something different to talk about with the program, and you can see where it goes. If it works, if it doesn't, Archie Miller's shown that he can at least somewhat try and fix that. But that is going to wrap it up for our talk on the coaching changes, and that is going to wrap it up for our 156th show of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, as always, to that live audience for coming out, participating in the chat section. Really appreciate that support. News and updates, like I said, Twitter, Indiana HQ as of now. Check all that out, especially if you really get a lot of our updates on the Hoosier Sound, which, again, I really apologize. We try to get those podcast things. So if you don't like your Twitter feed jammed up with all the updates Indiana HQ puts out, I understand. I'm sorry. We're really trying to work on it, but not getting much help. But subscribe to our show. I think easiest, YouTube. Hit subscribe. It's really easy right there, so you can see all of it. But most importantly, if you enjoy our show, leave a review. Tell a friend, share our links. Your support is how this podcast grows, so we can reach all those passionate IU fans such as yourself. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.
See ya.